Welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of the After Action Project. We're going to take a couple minutes to share it up, take 2 minutes. So at 7:37, we'll start this thing. You guys can more than welcome to blame me for our tardiness. It is 110% my fault on more than one incident. So tonight, you guys are going to have the pleasure of listening to our conversation with Scott Mitchell and one of his students, Christian. We're going to talk about Krav Maga, unarmed self-defense, how it relates to armed self-defense, and all of that good stuff. So it's going to be a great episode. So make sure you share this with your friends, your family, your loved ones, and anybody out there that you want to bring over to the dark side of gun ownership and taking the responsibility for their own protection. It's going to be a great episode for you folks. One of the top 3 episodes that we've done, I would say, hands down. And I would be surprised if it fell from those ranks as we continue to do more of these.
It is actually the top 3 episode because it's episode 3.
It is. I'm confident it's going to stay there, though. Another 5 episodes down the road, because I think we were talking about having one of our students on. So excellent. Excellent. Judson, what have you been up to, buddy? While we take a couple minutes to share this up through Facebook and let people get on here with us.
I spent the weekend teaching a church security detail, basically defensive tactics to defend their church against multiple different types of threats, whether it be a bomb or a active shooter or just a churchgoer gone bad kind of thing. And we did about 5 hours of medical, and then we did about 10 hours of force-on-force training. And that was the force-on-force training. We actually rolled the medical into that. So when the actor or the responder, went into a situation and they had to take out a threat, they then had to perform emergency medical procedures on the victims. So it was actually a really great class. We really enjoyed it. It was
Did he cut out on anybody else's feed, or was it just mine on that last one?
Yeah, he cut out.
Okay.
So do I have to say all that over again?
No, nobody wanted to hear it anyways. No, just playing. It was just the last 2 sentences that you said.
They didn't mean anything then. I was wrapping up and turning it back over to you.
Awesome. We will be, I got a little echo in my ear. Scott, what about you? What have you been up to lately? You're a local firearms instructor and Krav Maga instructor here in Albuquerque, so I'm sure you've been quite busy. What have you been up to the last couple weeks?
We recently had an instructor course that was 3 days, and that was the end of August. A few concealed carry classes, and we're teaching Krav Maga, empty hand defense, defensive tactics, 3 or 4 times a week. So, women's self-defense, we've done a bunch of seminars. We've been doing one of those every other month. A lot of demand for that.
And that's don't quote me on the price, guys, but I believe that's a free seminar.
It has been, but I think that we're going to move to just a regular weekly class that's woman. The problem with the free seminar is that we'll put out the registration, and we'll have I leave it open to more than twice as many participants as we can actually handle. And the registration will fill up, and most of those people don't show up, and other people that really want to get in can't get in because the registration is full. So we have a waiting list, and we've been going through that, and that's why we've had one really almost at least every other month, and sometimes in consecutive months, where we used to just do them quarterly. So I think a regular woman-only class is going to probably work better, once a week, and because some women they're not able or interested in training in a co-ed class, and it's understandable. So That's really what we're looking at.
That's awesome that you're doing that. Andy, what have you been up to lately, buddy?
Just busy at work as usual. Doing a lot of studying up though. Uh, beyond my regular normal day job. I've said it before, but concealed carry and just training in general is pretty much my second hobby, next to hanging out with the family as much as I can. Me and my wife have pretty opposite schedules, so our time we have together is pretty valuable. So we try to hang out when we can. But other than that, I'm doing research, I'm watching videos, listening to We Like Shooting podcasts, all kinds of stuff like that. But pretty busy guy lately. So um, that's about it.
Yeah, I think that's Christian. Are you on with us still? And what have you been up to lately, Christian?
Yes, sir. I'm here. It's been a pretty busy month. As Scott had mentioned, I was one of the participants in the instructor training course for the end of August. Also work, and also for our church security, I'm also on the church safety team at our home church here, and we just had a defensive tactics refresher. We do a lot of church security training. Calvary Albuquerque has been doing that since 2009, so we're pretty on game with a lot of our active shooter training, defensive tactics, de-escalation, that kind of thing. So been kind of busy with that once a month, serving on that security team. And of course work, busy working in IT as an analyst. So, we're open 24/7, so that can be a little bit, keep you busy there, and spending time with the wife and family. So that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, we definitely
awesome,
appreciate you guys taking the time to jump on with us. And then now we're going to get ready into the after action project for you. Sorry, Judson. I know I kind of threw you for a loop with that whole intro while we share it, but here we go.
This is the After Action Project, and we're bringing you the student's perspective on firearms training. This is the podcast that takes you inside the eyes of the student and the mind of the instructor. From practical to tactical, medical to legal, and everything in between. If there's a course for it, this is your fly on the wall after action destination. This is the After Action Project.
We're your hosts, Judson Crossland, Andy Montoya, and Jeremy Gill. We're joined by Scott Mitchell of Duke City Krav Maga and Provident Personal Protection, as well as one of his longtime students, Christian Gonzalez. Tonight we'll be discussing an often overlooked but critically important skill set. That's right, we're discussing unarmed self-defense training, specifically Scott Mitchell's Krav Maga training. Andy, let's get this one started.
Hey, Martner. Christian. Misread the notes here. I'm making up my own words here. Let's start that over.
Let's start that one from the top with the right name.
Yeah, let's start that over. Jeremy can edit it out. Hey, Christian, how you doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
Good. So tell us what gear students need to have for a Krav Maga training, and then what gear do you use specifically?
So gear, for sure, you got to have a cup. I mean, that's probably really important gear you would need. Just clothes, just regular, nothing uniform, if that's what you're meaning.
So you don't have to wear a gi or anything like that, just mainly a cup to protect the jewels, and that's about it?
Sure. Yeah, and then when we do some of our advanced stuff, we want to wear a mouthpiece. We do some headgear for some light sparring. So, T-shirts, shorts, whatever's comfortable, shoes, just anything, if you have a shirt and you don't care if it gets kind of torn sometimes, that's always good to have.
Nice. So would you say it's based off of more the pretty much the street version of self-defense, the more reality type stuff?
Yes, sir.
Judson,
tell me something. Who said that and why?
There's a ghost.
So edit this out, Jeremy. So Christian, tell me something. How long have you been training with Krav Maga, and why Duke City Krav Maga for your unarmed self-defense training?
I've been training Krav Maga for about 6 years. It'll be 7 in July. Kind of a little bit of background. Scott and I have been training together since 2011. Scott has advanced his training rapidly the past, few years, 4 years. And just as, when I was, found out that Scott was opening up Duke City Krav Maga, for me, it was just very natural to kind of follow right under Scott. I mean, Scott's a great instructor, and when we were in class and just all of the techniques and everything that he brought to the table, man, it just really was like, wow, this is great. So I knew that from the beginning when he was opening up a school at Duke City, it was just real natural for me just to follow right under him and have him continue my advanced training. So Duke City's been there for about a year now, and it's a great school. We learn a lot.
That's awesome. I definitely second that shout out about Scott being a great instructor. I've known Scott personally for about 5 or 6 years now. We did some training together, some firearms training together years ago. And let me just stop that in the background. So we did some training together years ago. And like you, that's one of the things that I picked up on was his integrity and everything that he brought to the table. But talk to us a little bit, Christian, about what a typical training session looks like for you over there at Duke City Krav Maga.
Well, when for our class, we have about a 5 to 10 kind of warm up, and then we do some combative striking, during class. After that, we do kind of about a 20, 30-minute of teaching of techniques that Scott will bring up to us, and then following up with that, we'll have about a 5 to 10 kind of a stress drills, kind of bringing that kind of to light. It's a really great class. It's awesome. We really learn a lot, and especially with the techniques that Scott brings. I think with a lot of his training, he goes out and gets trained in other systems, and goes out and gets that knowledge and brings it back and teaches to us students. And I mean, it's rare that a lot of your instructors will go out and get training. I think that's really unique.
All right, so Christian, tell me something. I've taken some hand-to-hand type stuff, but it's been like 20 years. It was like back in my early 20s, late teens, when that was kind of a thing. And I haven't really done a lot of hand-to-hand or unarmed self-defense type stuff. I've always just included the knife and the gun. What piece of advice would you have for someone who hasn't received a lot of unarmed self-defense training, and they're looking to start to kind of go down that rabbit hole and find out what that's all about?
I think the advice I would say is kind of look into it, do a little bit of research, what Krav Maga is. And for me, it was something that I felt was more practical for me. I'd taken martial arts as a kid. I took Taekwondo. And, as a kid, you try to get into it. And of course, you kind of start growing out of that kind of phase. But I've always had that niche for martial arts. And, I think that my advice would be is do it. Get some of that training of the unarmed self-defense. I think it's a great way to learn, some techniques and save your life someday. But I think they should really look into it.
Yeah, I got to say, for us is our main base is, concealed carry, firearms instruction, stuff like that. We've also added in with the element of with Judson's help here and with Sean Heron, We Like Shooting. We've added a civilian medical course, and I think adding all these things into a toolbox for us to have as citizens is a good benefit. So for the armed citizen like us, do you think this training can complement self-defense plans Do you believe this training is for people who do not wish to carry a firearm at all for self-defense? And then finally, if you can answer the third one, for me, I'm an average guy. We're called practical defense. I'm kind of a practical guy. I'm not tactical. I don't wear a ton of tactical stuff. I'm your average American, overweight, fat guy. So for me, somebody like me, would it be a fair class for just a normal Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Krav Maga training really complements with firearms training. Just to kind of a little bit of, kind of going back, when I first started doing Krav Maga for about 3.5 years, we're learning to do disarms for knives, sticks, and particularly guns. I wasn't even carrying at that point. And to be honest, I was afraid of firearms. I just didn't understand the mechanics and what, how to handle one. And, talking with Scott, over these years, he became a firearms instructor. He said, hey, why don't you come and check out my class? And, the minute I stepped in that class and, Scott was teaching, and by the end of the weekend, I felt really comfortable with that firearm. So I kind of felt like, if I'm learning how to disarm firearms, I think it's important for me to actually own a firearm, kind of learn, the safeties of it. It's not this big scary thing that, a lot of people feel that it is, and it's just another tool. And I think, having that firearms training and doing the training that I'm doing really complements with Krav. And I really think it's awesome. So, that's kind of been helpful for me to overcome that fear of handling guns, and complements it real well. So I feel comfortable carrying, and also just my hand skills. I know that, having my firearm, I'm not going to use it unless it's, imminent threat or somebody's life's in danger. I'm going to rely more on my hand-to-hand skills and just, situation awareness, just being aware and what's going on, and just threat of recognition, and, that kind of thing. So it's for an average Joe for sure. I really recommend it.
So what got you into, I guess, was there something that sparked a need or a desire for you to go out and seek the unarmed self-defense training? And then from there, what led you to Krav Maga specifically?
That's funny you mentioned that. I was kind of thinking about that the other day. In fact, I think this will be the first time I ever actually told anybody. In fact, not even Scott knows this, but back when I was 8 years old, I lost my little brother. He was 7 years old. We were both born with some medical issue. And as me and my little brother would go to school, we would, walk to school. Back in those days, it wasn't a big deal walking by ourselves. But I remember several times that we had these group of neighborhood kids, man, that would come up and pick on me and yell at me, and, just being one of these bullies. And as a kid, I was 8 years old. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle that. But my little brother, who was a year younger, who was sick physically, stood up for me, and I just didn't understand, my little brother having that, he stepped up, he's the one who's the little brother, protecting his big brother, and when it should have been me protecting my little brother. Sorry to get a little choked up, but, so I think after that,
no, it's not good.
8 years old, you're thinking, wow, I should have been the big brother. I should have been the better big brother, So after that, I kind of started getting into, years later, got into Taekwondo, self-defense, did that a little bit. And then later on, I just being involved in church security since 2009 and finding out what's going on in the world and their streets. And then after MCOR was, I think, a big trigger too, seeing what's going on in our, in the workplace. So I think that's what triggered it. And I joined a class. At the time, it was Nick Hart, who was the instructor then. And, I got hooked as soon as that day one. I just said, this is where I need to be.
Yeah, well, terribly sorry and deep condolences for your loss. And I can imagine the pain that it still kind of stirs up in you. I've trained with, so we have a couple other things in common there. I've trained with Nick Card as well, I believe, Scott. I'm not sure if you were in the gun disarm seminar that I took a couple years ago with Nick Card and Global One Defense. But it seems like they have a great group of instructors together, and also a great group of students. And then the other thing was, I don't know how old I was, but it was at some point in middle school. It's something that I don't share too often or with too many folks. So why not share it out there on Facebook? But, in middle school, I remember 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, one of those grades, getting bullied. And it's one of those things where I don't really think I understood the impact of that until later on in life. And I don't know if I fully kind of grasped it and wrap my head around it, but it's a shame that there are people out there in this world that kind of thrive on that mentality where to prop themselves up, they're going to put somebody else down and then take advantage of those folks. And I know that's one of the, I don't know, I don't want to say I know, but I believe that's one of the core principles behind what Scott does, and what Duke City Krav Maga stands for is giving those people that might not otherwise be able to defend themselves or give themselves a means to defend themselves with reciprocal violence. I'm fairly confident that that's a principle that Scott has. And Scott, you can elaborate on that if you'd like.
That's absolutely right. We do a lot of pro bono work. Sometimes it's just a kid. A parent calls and my kid's being bullied, and yeah, let's get together, and that's the way it works. It's just, it really is about bringing it to people and enabling people, empowering people. And that's what the system's all about. That's what the founder of Krav Maga wanted. He wanted it to be spread worldwide. It came from Nazi Europe, right? Where Jews were being accosted by thugs. Ordinary people were being beaten up in the streets. And the system was created for the regular people to defend themselves against these Nazi thugs. So, it's very much about bringing it to the community and trying to educate people and, giving them some skills. And it's not about, fame or fortune, that's for sure. And you guys know that as instructors, right?
Yeah, it's very little fame and very little fortune. But if you're doing it for those reasons, you're probably not a reputable instructor, and your students probably aren't benefiting as much as they should. So,
yeah, that's the way it's going.
Judson, back to you, buddy.
Oh, sorry. I thought you hadn't asked your question yet. So edit this out and pause. So tell me something, Christian. What is the one thing that you would wish that you had known before you began your journey on this path that has brought you to this podcast in all reality?
I wish I knew Krav before, back in the day. I wish it was offered back then, earlier in my years, as I get older, I feel it, but I just wish I knew Krav training, years ago. I wish it was more of offered and available, but, so kind of one thing I wish.
I'm going to say the same thing as with Jeremy, as well as, like you said, Christian, I was bullied too as a kid, believe it or not. And I grew up very poor, so I can pretty much relate to that. But my question to you is, what do you want to accomplish by continuing to train with Scott in your Krav Maga? What's your ultimate goal that you're looking to accomplish?
First I want to, just continue my training. This coming couple weeks I'll be, testing for my brown belt. And then hopefully next year or so I'll be receiving my black belt. But I just want to continue training and learning and being able to even teach others. You know, a lot of my family members, especially a lot of my nieces. My nieces are, you know, my oldest niece is in college at NAU, and I wish we would have had more time to kind of sit with her and I've given her a quick crash course on a little bit of tactics, a little bit of simple things. But, you know, ultimately I like to just teach my family and friends, you know, about personal safety. That's kind of one of my, you know, I'm a big advocate for personal safety, and I think that's why I like, you know, training with Scott. You know, I like that how he aligns with what I think. You know, he's all about, you know, personal safety and, you know, and teaching it, and you know, it's something I want to just continue to do too, and that's kind of what I'm looking forward to.
So, Christian, you know, based on that answer, do you feel like you're actually on the path to accomplish that? I mean, I was bullied too as a child. I mean, I'm 6'3" and I weigh 150 pounds, and I've been that same, you know, frame and weight since I was in, you know, like 8th grade. So I've always been that kind of, I look like I'm out of place kind of guy. You know, do you feel like you're actually on the path with Scott to accomplish that goal?
Absolutely, no doubt, absolutely, yes. You know, I'm kind of heading that way, and the more that I learn from Scott and what he teaches, it's, you know, the more I learn, and I'm always learning. It's just it's always continually learning, you know, new things, and so yeah, I'm heading down that path, and you know, I just kind of want to spread it to a lot of my family, friends, and kind of share with them and help them with, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's totally awesome. Jeremy?
So, Scott, you're a firearms instructor as well as a Krav Maga instructor. I want to come back to this question, but we're kind of opened up a path of discussion that I don't think any of us really anticipated. But as a Krav Maga instructor, somebody who teaches regular folks, how to defend themselves with what they have been blessed, or in my case, cursed with. What's some advice that you have for parents whose child is might be getting bullied, or they suspect might be getting bullied, or for the you know, or for any of the older folks that they might be experiencing some type or form of bullying, whether it's in a K-12 setting or a workplace setting? What advice do you have for those folks out there that might be experiencing some of the stuff that it sounds like 4 of the 5 of us have experienced, and some of those folks that might be experiencing a harsher reality of or a you know, because I talk to people about, you know, I was bullied in middle school, and it took me to a dark place, but I don't think I experienced the level of bullying that this generation of kids are experiencing. So what's some advice that you have for those folks?
Well, now, you know, you alluded to this, but kids have a variety of platforms, right? It's not just, I'll meet you out, you know, behind the bike rack after school, or I turn the corner going to lunch and there's the guy, right? Now you have social media, you have text messaging, you have all this other stuff, all these other avenues. I think it's harder for kids now. But even adults, right? I mean, here's the thing, you know, these bullies, some of them, they end up in the corporate world, right? You could work in a restaurant and there's a manager who's a bully, right? So it is not isolated in just the schoolyard, and it's not isolated at a certain age level, right? It just kind of permeates society. I think the advice, if I wanted to give some very, you know, general advice, because everything is situational, is that you need to stand up, right? Bullies typically they picked you because they didn't think you'd fight back, and that applies to the schoolyard. It applies to the boardroom in the corporation. And in the moment you show them that you'll stand up to them, that you're not going to play that game with them, especially as adults, they'll back right down. But it's important for people to recognize. I think it's harder when you're older to recognize when the HR manager of your company is bullying you, right? It's very subtle. But you have to recognize that, you're being pushed around, and if the person's treatment of you is not something that you deserve or need to put up with, and push back. It's easier said than done. I understand that, but it is pervasive in many, many aspects of life, and it's not just me getting dumped headfirst into the trash can every day when I got off the bus, right? And some people they get to a point where they're fed up with it, and they break that cycle in their life, and they stop living that way. And with other people, it's not so easy to do. And I as a parent, really it's like the worst thing as a parent. The bullying you go through, right, or you went through as a kid, right, you can kind of put that in your past, and it was your childhood, and it's just one of many traumatic experiences as a kid, right? But when it happens to your kid, right, when it's your kid getting bullied, and you realize, man, the school isn't going to do anything about this. Back in the day when I was a kid, you got hauled into the office, and the principal said, well, who started it? And once it was determined that, the other guy started it, and he's probably already known as being a bully anyway, well, it was his ass on the line. Now they won't do anything. They just suspend both kids. That's the automatic reaction. Zero tolerance. We don't care who started it. We don't care what happened. We're just going to suspend you both because, we don't have the tools or the authority to deal with this. So that's a very long answer to your question, sir. But
No,
bullying is a really that's a big subject.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's a great answer. As a parent, my son, he just started pre-K, and that's something that gives me anxiety and worries me. But to the comment you made about both kids getting suspended, I would love to send my child to a school, and if there's one out there that exists, I might figure out a way to make it happen to get him into that school, to where it's not acceptable for kids to watch somebody get bullied, right? And where it's encouraged that you stand up to the bully. Because when I look at who I want my son to be, I want my son to be that, in the cliche sense, the sheepdog, right? I want my son to be the kid that is going to not let wrong be done to somebody and idly watch. And I would, as parents, there's only so much we can do to foster that, especially when they're in a school setting where it's don't hit back, don't defend yourself, because if you do, you're going to get suspended. But I think that's one of the easiest ways that we could really work towards solving this solution of bullying is where if you watch somebody get bullied and you don't do anything about it, you're going to share the same consequences as the bully. Because we can't do it, right? We can't sit there and because the teachers don't see it, the principal doesn't see it. Who sees it is the bully, the kid that's getting bullied, and then those folks that are sitting there watching and not doing anything about it.
I agree with you. And now we're off into the weeds.
Yeah. So
you just say this, okay? I totally agree with you that I would want my kid to be the sheepdog, quote unquote, in this circumstance. But there's a downside to that. So obviously you want your kid to be that kid that stands up against injustice. But let me tell you, I was that kid. And what happens is you take the place of that kid, right? You stand up for that other kid who won't stand up for himself. And if you don't have the size or the physical prowess or whatever, then you become the target, right? You end up taking the beating for that kid. And I can't tell you how many times I did that as a kid. And it took me until much later in life to figure out why I was that person. But that person, that's why I teach now. That's why I do what I do now. because that part of me hasn't changed. And, you know, you brought this up in your intro, the dark side. Okay. This is the dark side of it. Okay. When I was a kid, you know, I grew up in a very violent environment, and I could not, because I was so small, I couldn't protect people. I watched them being brutalized, and I couldn't do anything about it because I was too small. And that's why when I went into, you know, junior high school, and I saw some kid being beaten up, and I would try to intervene, thinking that I could do it this time, I could handle it this time. It still wasn't big enough. I still didn't have the skills, you know? So that's the dark side of it. You know, you want your kid to stand up for injustice, but really, I think the best thing we can do is teach our kids and everybody we care about, and anybody we can teach and come in contact with, is stand up for yourself. You know, and get the skills, get the training, get the things that you need that empower you to do that, but in a effective and legal way, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mentioned it too. You know, I got bullied as a kid, and I, you know, not to be kind of a pity party, but you know, we grew up pretty poor, as most of us did, and you know, I grew up in a single. You know, my mom worked 2, 3 jobs, you know, to make ends meet, and finally, she saw me getting bullied, and you know, she sent me to a boxing class, and I learned how to put up my dukes. You know, I learned how to fight back. And I didn't stay in boxing class long enough, but I learned enough to fight back and stand up. Now, with that being said, I didn't win every fight, but you know what? I didn't turn down every fight. So, with that being said, for you, Scott, um, you know, I think what you said, you know, doing pro bono classes and stuff like that for Krav Maga, that's amazing that you do that. And, you know, from me to you, I appreciate that because there are kids out there that really need it. But moving on to, you know, you're a firearms instructor also. So a little bit about why you train students in Krav Maga, in addition to what we've already talked about, and how that training complements someone's overall self-defense plan, including those things with, you know, being armed, as well as, you know, maybe a medical training, and then adding this martial art to your toolbox.
Yeah. I had the benefit, you know, many years ago of having an instructor, and I can't mention his name. Unfortunately, we're, you know, everybody who's trained with him understands that he's doing some dangerous undercover work, and so we all respect that. We don't bring up his name, but he was a guy many years ago that just said, you know, that, you know, your firearms training, okay, it's you know, the old the quote about, you know, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem you have begins to resemble a nail, right? And he said you have to have empty hands training, right? And so, you know, my passion in integrating these two worlds, especially, you know, being trained in Krav Maga, you understand that, you know, within 10 feet, that firearm is not very useful. And I mean, this is kind of, you know, people will call me a heretic for saying this, you know, but this, my passion is bringing these two worlds together, you know, the gun world or weapons world with the empty hands world, because you need both. You really do.
Yeah,
You're standing less than 10 feet from me and you draw a weapon, well, you know, maybe you'll get to draw it. And even if you draw it, you're not going to get to use it. Okay.
Yeah, that's something
so
that.
here's the thing. You know,
Go ahead, Judson.
I'm sorry. I know that, you know,
No, you're good.
I just felt compelled to say this. I mean, within 10 feet, you got a weapon drawn on you. It is a, you know, sacrilege sin to draw on a drawn weapon. I mean, you just don't do it. You cannot get your firearm out fast enough. Look at every video out there on the internet. And, you know, Jeremy, I know you had something to add to that, or maybe it was Andy, but you just never draw on a drawn weapon.
Yeah, what I was going to say is we'd have a discussion in class about students continuum of training. And, I would encourage people. I said, before you come out and you take one of our defensive handgun clinics, you need to go out and get some unarmed self-defense training. And I used to specifically Krav Maga, because it's one of those things where you don't need years and years and years of training. A couple sessions and you're going to be light years ahead of where you were. And I think the biggest thing for that is the confidence that students gain after doing some of those training sessions and drills and working on some of those techniques, where they can see it isn't rocket science. You don't have to do, you don't have to be a third-degree black belt to defend yourself against some guy on the street. So that's one of the things. And now it's, before you come back and spend any money with us for firearms training, you need to go get unarmed self-defense training, and you need to go get emergency medical training. So Christian, how do you think your Krav Maga training supplements your self-defense plan with regards to carrying a firearm on your person? And where do you see that Krav Maga training coming into play in a life-threatening self-defense encounter?
Sorry, man. Can you repeat that? I got kind of cut out there.
I was saying, Christian, how does your Krav Maga training supplement your self-defense plan, and where do you see it coming in to play in a life-threatening self-defense encounter?
Having the skills with my Krav Maga with the firearms training. I mean, there's going to be probably scenarios where I'm not going to be able to engage with a firearm. I mean, I'm going to have to rely on my hand-to-hand skills, and I think that's kind of a good combination there. Everything's going to be situational. I mean, it's going to be a matter of what's been given to you, and kind of doing some of that problem solving there, and what that kind of thing. So if that answers your question.
No, absolutely it does.
So
to be honest,
sorry, go ahead.
Just to kind of go back, there's a lot of, there's certain places where we're not able to, of course, carry our firearms, and so I think that hand-to-hand combat, Krav Maga training, I think is real important. You can't always just rely on your tools, whether it's your firearm, knife, or whatnot. But I think having those hand skills and the Krav Maga skills is just a big plus.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. So back to Scott. This is kind of a redundant question, but I think it's a good question. What can a student expect or hope to accomplish by training with you at Duke City Krav Maga?
Well, one thing that they'll understand is simple skills like that. Somebody mentioned it earlier, and it may have been before we went live, but I think it was you, Andy, that just having a few effective empty hand skills, right? You don't need this Rolodex of kung fu movie techniques, right? And what they'll get in this training, okay, Krav Maga is used worldwide in police and military applications more than any other system. We have obviously civilian applications for it, but what they'll learn is what works for them. It's not you don't have to be an athlete. You don't have to be a physical specimen. What you need to have, and it's no different with armed self-defense, okay? It doesn't matter if it's armed self-defense or unarmed self-defense. You have to have the attendant mindset. I mean, if you don't have the mindset, it doesn't matter. You can have, every black belt offered. You can have, some boutique custom-made pistol with all the right stuff, right? The right ammo and the right mods, and you can have your knife and your flashlight and your OC spray and whatever else, right? It doesn't matter if you don't have the mindset. So to your question, Andy, what they'll get is that. They'll get some simple tools that fit their physical ability that they can use effectively. But they'll also get the attendant mindset. They'll get the training in the psychology. They'll get the training in the legal aspect. I know that Jeremy, he and I are both very intent on training, the legal aspects, the consequences, right, of self-defense. And I think if you're an instructor and you're not training that, you're really in this day and age, you're negligent. And it doesn't matter if it's firearms or Krav Maga. There's plenty of Krav Maga instructors that will tell you, you just need to beat this guy to a pulp. Period. You've seen those Krav Maga T-shirts, right? Touch me and your first lesson is free. Well, what if I'm just touching you because I want some directions and you end up sending me in the hospital, right? You can't just beat everybody down, right? So there has to be, and this goes back to, force continuum. You have to have a range of things to do. And that's, again, back to your question, that's what they'll get, is they'll get a range of options, from handling the, drunk uncle at the family gathering to, the aggressive coworker, to the carjacker, to, the person who's like literally stabbing them, right? You've been stabbed a couple of times, okay, right? And now you realize you're being stabbed. What do you do now? So it's the whole spectrum. And but what I can tell you, is my goal is to have people leave every night. If they go to Krav Maga class, they walk out of there with a tool that they can use. It's simple and effective.
Yeah, I think mindset is huge. You think of a Krav Maga class, I'm going to walk in and you're going to start kicking me in the face 100 times and you say, defend it. You know what I mean? And to walk into a Krav Maga class, a self-defense class, whether it's guns, martial arts, whatever, I think you hit the nail right on the head. You've got to have the mindset to know that, what, I'm not going to be the victim. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to stand up for myself. So that's a good point. Don't you think, Judson?
I do actually, and I have a follow-up question for you, Scott. And I already know the answer to it, and I know that Andy and Jeremy and Christian most likely know the answer to it as well. But I want our listeners to hear your answer to it. I wake up every morning, do my routine, I pet my dogs, I let them out, I do my thing, I get in the shower, and I get out, I put my belt on, I strap a gun to my hip, and I walk out the door. What is my biggest misconception, or the responsibly armed person's biggest misconception with their little self-defense plan that they have? Because I walk out the door, and in my mind, I've done everything I can. I mean, I've trained weekend after weekend after weekend, and I've shot thousands of rounds, 8,000 rounds a month for years and years and years. What am I missing? What is the average person like myself missing from this big picture of our self-defense plan?
Well, that's a fantastic question. And I think it's probably the most important question that you can ask in terms of the armed citizen. Now, I'll tell you, I know, Justin, just from seeing what you've been doing, that you already kind of know the answer to this, right? Because I know you've been doing some force-on-force training. So the misconception is that I'm going to walk out of my house with all my training, right? I've read. I'm very vigilant as an armed citizen. I'm very vigilant as I hate to use the term, but as the sheepdog, right? Here's the thing: the penitentiary is full of untrained guys that are very, very skilled at violence, and they've had no formal training. I think the hazard because I do the same thing. Everything you just described, that's the way I get up, I get myself ready, and I get out of the house. It's the same way. The reason I carry every day, everywhere, is because I don't want to be the guy that doesn't come home. I have people here that depend on me coming back, right? And the hazard is that because of our kind of controlled and cookie cutter training that we think we got it covered. Maybe the biggest problem is that we think we're going to be able to produce that gun and legally, ethically, effectively use it in an encounter. Morally, yeah, sure, exactly, right. Because so many of these encounters start with words. There's a verbal exchange, and if we don't know how to manage that part of it, if all we do is focus our time on the gear and the gun training, and we don't put any time into managing unknown contacts, and that's I'm stealing that from Craig Douglas, because he's one of the pioneers and the innovators in integrating these worlds. If I think I can just go out with a gun or a knife or insert name of tool here and deal with every situation that might come up, and I've run into this with law enforcement, and I don't, believe me, I would challenge you to find a bigger supporter of law enforcement than me. But a lot of, especially with the old school, it's, any problem, any question that comes up, I have the answer for it right here on my hip. And it's just not true. You have to be able to talk to people. You have to be able to use other tools, and you have to understand that, that firearm, there are very narrow and specific circumstances in which that firearm can justifiably be deployed. It's very narrow, and if you don't have something to bridge that gap between 0 and 60, you're fooling yourself. So I think that's the misconception, is that I'm ready. When I walk out the door and I've had my training and I'm strapped, and I'm aware, I'm really like present. I'm in the moment, and I'm a good guy, and I, I've done all the homework as far as the common wisdom goes. Then I'm really ready. Okay? Because let me tell you what, I tell people this all the time. You can watch UFC on TV. You can get a ringside ticket. You can have spit and blood and sweat slung on you, right? But if you've never been punched in the face by somebody who's really meaning to hurt you, okay, that can be the thing that vapor locks you. That can be the thing that shuts you down. And what happens is if you don't have any other tools, you're going to produce that firearm, and it might be too soon. And this is what we see, and maybe you've experienced this in your force on force classes, is the biggest thing that we see is that people either go to the gun too soon or they wait too long.
Absolutely.
That's maybe you've seen this, is they are going through the legal aspects and all the other stuff in their head, and they wait too long. So it requires a lot of mental work and a lot of training to know when it's time and when it's too soon.
It's the Goldilocks principle, as we talk about it in class. It can't be too much, it can't be too soon, it can't be too little, and it can't be too late. But Judson, I know you had a follow up on that.
I was listening to Scott talk about that, and the first thing that came to my mind is we have Christian here that can come in and say, okay, this is what I've learned, this is what I've been taught. And Christian, from your perspective, the same question, or at least a kind of a segue question over to that. What are your feelings on, the misconceptions that we as responsibly armed citizens, because you've been to the training, I haven't. Jeremy, I don't know if he has, or Andy, but we haven't been through the training like you have. So tell us what do you think from a student's perspective are the misconceptions of strapping a gun on your hip and that self-defense plan that we all have?
I think, kind of piggybacking off what you guys mentioned, we kind of say, I've got this training, I'm armed, I'm leaving the house, but reality is if you don't have that mindset, we can be complacent, we can have all the training, we can have the tools that we need, but if we don't have that mindset to take action when we need to be, what good is it then? I think misconception is just, we need to just continue to train and be prepared. Anything can happen, everything's all situational and scenario based. And I think, we just gotta people think, well, I'm trained, I'm good to go, well, your day can go crappy, you become complacent. I have, I'm not very, I'll let my guard down and, not having that situational awareness, kind of guy going on. And wow, all of a sudden, boom, this guy comes up, he's right next to my vehicle. And I'm at Walmart, and I'm like, whoa, how did that happen? I just kind of let my guard down. I kind of feel like, well, I'm armed, I'm good, I got my knife, I got a gun, I got my flashlight, I'm good to go. But, sometimes we just become too complacent. We can't be. We've got to always be prepared and have that mindset of, I got to be ready and not let our guard down.
I agree.
Christian, just a quick question to you. Do you have your concealed carry license?
Yes, sir.
Did you do it with Scott as well?
Yes, sir.
Nice. So Scott, back to you. We kind of covered the mindset deal. What's a typical training session look like? And how would how would you continue that in your training? Is it, we talk privately, and I'm going to kick this at you again. I think it'd be awesome if you did like a one-day class, but what would a typical training session look like?
A typical empty hands class would be, Christian described it a little bit earlier, but it's going to be a combination of, obviously we don't cover, all of this in one class. I teach a 90-minute class 3 times a week for the most part, if it's not a seminar or some other specialty thing. And, typically, we're going to warm up, we're going to do some basic combative skills, and it doesn't matter if you're a black belt or a 2nd degree black belt, or the person that just walked in off the street and you're taking your first class that night. Everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody's going to work on basic combatives, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Andy, that you mentioned. Having the few things that are really effective. It's not rocket science. So we're going to work combatives for a while. Basic stuff, and then we're going to get into techniques, right, that really develop an understanding of principles. Okay, so I'll give you an example. If we're talking about a gun disarm, okay, there are really 2 things that you have to do that have to be present in any legitimate gun disarm. Number 1, you have to redirect the line of fire / get out of the line of fire. That's primary. That's unavoidable. Number 2, you have to control that weapon and the weapon arm. Right? Those are the 2 cardinal rules. Everything after that or around that, before that, is icing on the cake. But if you fail at one of those 2 things, if you don't redirect the line of fire / get out of the line of fire, and you don't control the weapon, you failed. So we talked about this earlier, and it may have been before we went live, but the guy that attacks you didn't go to class. He didn't go to Krav Maga class. So he's gonna do it wrong based on your training, right? So you have to be able to improvise and adapt to what you're presented. The solution determines, or I'm sorry, the situation determines the solution, right? Everything's situational. So you'll get some of that technique and principle, hands-on physical knowledge. You'll get some idea about where the line has to be drawn in terms where self-defense turns into aggravated assault, which is really important with Krav Maga, because Krav Maga is a hard style. I mean, it's not a sports style. It's designed to attack and incapacitate, eliminate your adversary in a second or two, maybe 3. It's not about fighting, right? It's about attacking that person and rendering them either unwilling or unable to fight you. So you'll get some training on the legal aspects of it, where self-defense turns into assault and battery, and you'll also get some of the psychology and why these guys are doing what they're doing. Knowledge of pre-incident or pre-attack indicators, and the psychology of why people do things, the motivations, the different types of predation that you might encounter, and the different types of social or antisocial violence that you may encounter. Where de-escalation might work, and where de-escalation and social tactics will actually work against you and make the situation worse. So it's I like to think that it's a little more rounded, and if you're advancing through my school, if you're getting to the brown belt level or the black belt level, you have to shoot. You have to handle firearms. You have to go to the range and run a gun. Period. And I think that maybe I don't know if it's unique, but maybe in the United States it's unique to my school. Other schools that I'm aware of, they don't do any live firearm stuff. In Israel, I know they do, but I don't know that schools in the U.S. do.
Yeah, I don't think it's too common from what I've seen. Krav Maga has gained some popularity in recent years from what I've seen. Well, just wanted to make a quick comment back on, you mentioned that bad guys haven't received formal training, so they're going to do it wrong. And I think what Scott meant by that, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but that goes to scripted training versus his principle-based training. Whereas like the bad guy, if you only know how to disarm a gun if a bad guy points it, touches your forehead with it, if that's how you're training gun disarms, the bad guy is going to do it wrong for you, and you're going to have to say, hey, hold on, buddy, you're doing it wrong. You're supposed to stick the gun to my temple, give me a 2-second count, and then I'm going to disarm you, right? Is that?
You're absolutely right. I'm sorry. That's exactly what I meant, is that you can't expect that anybody in the world ever is going to attack you the way you were drilling it in class. And so if all you have is this then that, or if the subject is exhibiting these symptoms, give them this pill, it's not going to work, man, because they're not going to do that. If all you've trained is gun to the forehead, and they stick it up under your chin as they're slapping you in the face and throwing you against the wall, spitting on you, and they have bad breath and BO, right? Well, you didn't experience any of that in the dojo, in the gym. So yeah, you have to understand what makes the stuff that you trained, what makes that work, what makes it valid. and how do I adapt that to the situation that I find myself in now?
Absolutely. So, Scott, I've got a question for you. We've gone for the last hour or so on, what Krav Maga is and who you are. And Christian, we're going to bring you back into this here very shortly after this. But who is your student, and what can future students do to prepare to actually prepare to take your class? So name that student. Who is that person, and what can that person do to prepare to take that first class with you?
It's a great question. Thank you, Judson. And honestly, anybody. I don't care what your physical abilities are, or your level of fitness, or your level of knowledge. Anybody can walk in and take a class from day one. Again, this is one of the myths, right? If we're talking about myth busting, I was hoping we were going to get to this question, and we kind of did with some of the previous discussion. But when the state of Israel was founded, right? They were surrounded by enemies. Every man and woman of legal age, of age and fighting ability had to be trained and had to go fight. Right? So this had to work for everybody, regardless of your age, your physical condition, or anything else. Everybody had to fight because Israel was surrounded by enemies. Okay? So the student could be anybody. But what I find is the students that come to the school are usually they're intelligent people. They're from all walks of lives. A lot of professional people come and do it. A lot of martial artists that realize, man, there's just something missing. Right? I'm training in this martial arts, this traditional style, and I'm getting some sort of indications that this is not going to actually work in the street. Those might be the students. I find that some gun people will migrate over to the empty hand stuff. I find that more empty hands people will migrate over to the gun side. But it's a very convoluted answer, Andy. But it could be anybody, young or old. I've people that we have a 65-year-old who's tough as nails and spars with 20-year-olds, and it's everything in between. But it really, any relevant training, any good training is going to kind of gravitate to the individual. It's not a one size fits all. I mean, some people try to take every training, whether it's firearms or anything else. They try to make it's one size. Everybody gets the same thing, and you can either cut it or you don't. Right? The reality is that the 50-year-old soccer mom is not going to be able to do the same things that a 20-year-old wrestler can do. And so you kind of have to tailor it to the individual. And this goes back to the simple aspect of it, right? I don't have to be a genius, and you don't have to be a black belt, for me to teach you how to, affect somebody's breathing or their eyesight. It's simple stuff, man. It's not rocket science. What I think the biggest thing is, we've talked about this before, is you got to get them to give themselves permission to do it. So the student could be anybody, Andy, really. But typically it's somebody who's kind of paying attention to what's going on in the world, and they realize, hey man, I could probably benefit from this. Some people come in and it's like it's not aggressive enough, or it's too aggressive, and they won't stick around. But the people that are kind of the core group in the school, they're usually pretty intelligent people, and they're not. Let me just say this: they're not opposed to using tools to augment their empty hand stuff. And so some of them who have zero knowledge of guns or weapons will go there, and they'll start developing those skills as well. Much more than the converse, much more than the gun guys coming over to the empty hands camp.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that we're seeing that. I believe there's a reluctance for gun guys to jump into the unarmed thing. I think there's more of a belief in that community that the gun is going to be good enough and they don't need the other, unarmed self-defense training. I think if you take somebody who's training in the unarmed stuff, it's easier for those folks to wrap their head around the idea that it might escalate to a point where they're to a point of deadly force. And at that point, you need to have the means and the ability to meet that violence with reciprocal violence. And if that's deadly force, there's a great tool for that. Christian, what parting advice do you have for listeners that are interested in taking Krav Maga, or that are interested in, I guess, expanding their ability to defend themselves and build upon that self-defense plan that they have?
What advice? I mean, again, I just reiterate, I think empty hand skills is important. You can't always just rely on your tools, on your firearm. You're going to be in places where you're not going to be able to carry it, or you may be surprised, all of a sudden, you're like, oh crap, you're just put in a situation where, you're not going to be able to draw your firearm. Or, I think it's, my advice is, get some training. I think it's real important. It goes hand to hand, no pun intended, but, it really complements, and I really recommend it.
That's awesome. I've been, this is episode 3, and I don't think I've had a pun that worked so well in any episode. So I like that. Judson, Andy, parting advice for, hey, Judson, Andy, parting advice for our listeners.
So I think that one of the things that I took away from this was the misconception question. That little stint of what Scott was talking about just really hit home with me, because I train a lot, and you ask anybody that knows me, if I'm not teaching on the range, I'm shooting on the range. If I'm not shooting on the range, I'm training on the range. And if I'm not on the range, I'm probably in some school or church or some other building doing force on force training with a bunch of other people. So, but there's more to it. And I think that my takeaway was I need more training in the non-lethal side of things. So this has actually been very eye-opening for me as well. Andy?
Yeah, I agree with you as well, Judson. I'm actually looking forward to taking a class with Scott. I'm pretty excited about that. Hopefully we'll see Christian in class there too. The big takeaway I have for us, this podcast got kind of serious pretty quick. And I think everybody needs to kind of, our listeners especially needs to kind of think about it. We see and we hear about bullying quite a bit. And then, it's easy to say, it's Facebook, who cares, just delete them or whatever. But it's serious stuff. And that's one thing that you kind of opened my eyes about. Bullying has changed since we were kids. Yeah, you get pushed down or you get called a bad name. And then, like you said, after school, I'm meeting you at the bike rack and I'm kicking your butt. Now it goes on and on and on. So that was something, it was kind of powerful to me to kind of think about that. And you opened my eyes, Scott. So I appreciate that. So thank you.
One of the things that Scott and I, a couple years ago, we partnered together on a class. It was, I think it was aptly named hand to hand to defensive concealed carry, or some other ridiculous name that I swindled these guys into going along with. But the idea, looking back on it, it reminds me of a component of the Force on Force course that we're hosting in October. And I'd love to have Judson and Christian join us in that class, because I think what it'll do for us as instructors and for that Force on Force course is there's a component that students need to see that they're able to do. And I think Krav Maga is the easiest skill set to bring into that. I haven't received extensive training in it by any means, but the little bit of training that I have had, when I go and I do some other Force on Force scenarios in the Civilian Medical 1 course, really opened my eyes and allowed me to handle those situations a little bit differently had I not had that experience. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, Scott and Christian, once we jump off air. Judson, yeah, you are teaching that class. You're teaching that class. You and Steve Reyes, I believe, are teaching that class. So Scott, tell us where people can find more information out about you and any other advice that you might have that we didn't get to in this podcast.
Well, one thing that I want to say for everybody who's viewing this after the fact or tuned in now, I think it's an important shout out for not just students but instructors as well. It's particularly important for instructors. I mean, there are some guys who are kind of leading, I think, the way for the rest of us in terms of integrating different modalities and really creating a multidisciplinary approach to personal protection. And I think it's very important for instructors. It's very important for students. And, certainly not to take away from anybody on this panel, but, ShivWorks, Craig Douglas, AKA South Narc, Cecil Birch out of Phoenix, William April, okay, and Paul Sharp. Okay, I know that there are others, okay, but these are just the guys I'm familiar with. These are instructors that are very committed and have spent years working on this integrative approach and building, multidisciplinary people, right? So that you're not just going out with one tool or a couple of tools. You're going out with a full view of what you're embarking on. So I encourage people to seek out training with those individuals and others who are trying to bring this into the new reality or a better reality, in terms of preparedness. For us, DukeCityKravMaga.com. We're easy to find on the interwebs. Provident Personal Protection, same thing. So if you want to, get some training in our area, in the 505 or the surrounding areas, and we are bringing these people in too, when we can. I'm bringing William April in November. And, Craig Douglas is going to be here teaching his extreme close quarters combat, extreme close quarters concepts in October. I can get you the information on that. So
yeah, that's on my list of courses that I want to take. So hopefully I can get my schedule lined up for that. Does anybody have anything else before we do our outro and all that good stuff? This will be edited out. So if you're watching this live, thank you for putting up with all of my crap.
Well, I would just like to say thank you to all you guys as instructors, because it's, people like you, people like us that are really trying to, move things along, further things and make a difference. I really commend you guys for doing what you do. I think it's, just awesome. And anything I can do to support you guys, I'm all in.
Oh, we appreciate it. And I was telling Scott and Andy, and I've said it before, here in Albuquerque, there's a small handful of other instructors that I'd feel confident training my loved ones, and you're high on the list. And that speaks to everything that you're about and the integrity that you have. You went through a list of people that are building a multidisciplinary self-defense program for students, and I definitely include you on that list. I definitely include Judson on that list, and that's a list that I hope that we practical defense can aspire to at one day, because it is something that it's more than a firearm. If the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem is going to be a nail. So we absolutely can't say enough good things about what you're doing here for folks, and we're just glad to be associated with you.
Well, the feeling is mutual.
Judson, do you have any compliments for me? I'm just playing. Or anybody else?
I think you're
All right, so we're gonna wrap it up here. We're gonna stop the live broadcast in just a moment, and then Scott and Christian, if you guys don't mind, hold on, Andy, what do you have?
I was just gonna say the same thing you said, Jeremy. Having good instructors is very important. And if you guys don't know, for me being a newer instructor, it was hard to find good training, and it's hard to find good instruction here in Albuquerque, believe it or not. And somebody like you, Scott, amazing. I'm pretty interested in taking your class as well. Of course, Judson, developed a good friendship with him. Our goal is to bring some good quality training to Albuquerque. So I think that's cool that you're bringing those people, Scott. And I think that's a big goal that we need for Albuquerque, and specifically to get some good quality training beyond just, concealed carry out here. So I think that's great. That's all I got.
It needs to be a training hub. Here we go. Maybe.
Related training course and would like to join us on
One of these days, I will get my stuff together.
laugh out loud.
Right?
You're a recent graduate of a firearms-related training course and would like to join us on our show. Or if you'd like us to review a specific firearm-related training course or instructor, shoot an email to show@afteractionproject.com. Remember to join a local firearms advocacy organization. As always, stay safe, shoot straight, and remember to secure your firearms so that unauthorized persons cannot gain access to them.